October 20th, 2011. Sirte, Libya. The world watched in shock as the bloodied figure of Muammar Gaddafi was dragged from a drainpipe. After 42 years of absolute rule, Africa's longest-serving leader was dead. Some celebrated his fall. Others mourned the collapse of a visionary dream. But who was Gaddafi? A brutal dictator who crushed opposition, or a revolutionary leader who tried to free Africa from Western domination? To answer this, we must journey back to the deserts of Libya, where the story of one of the most controversial leaders of the 20th century began. Libya, in the mid-20th century, was not the oil-rich nation we imagine today. Under King Idris I, crowned in 1951 after independence from Italy, Libya was one of the poorest countries in the world. Despite oil discoveries in 1959, profits flowed mainly to foreign companies and a small Libyan elite. Western powers, especially the United States and Britain, controlled Libya's resources and built large military bases, Wheelus Air Base in Tripoli being one of the largest American air facilities outside the U.S. Ordinary Libyans lived in poverty, literacy rates were below 20%, and tribal divisions defined politics. This was the Libya that young Muammar Gaddafi was born into in 1942, in a Bedouin tent near Sirte. Raised in poverty, inspired by Arab nationalism and Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, the young Gaddafi dreamed of liberation, not only for Libya, but for the entire Arab and African world. On September 1, 1969, while King Idris was abroad receiving medical treatment in Turkey, a group of young military officers staged a coup d'etat. The coup was bloodless, swift, and successful. At its head stood a 27-year-old army captain, Muammar Gaddafi. He announced the creation of the Libyan Arab Republic, abolishing the monarchy. Gaddafi styled himself as a revolutionary rather than a traditional head of state. Inspired by Nasser, he spoke of Arab unity, socialism, and freedom from Western control. Nationalization of oil, forcing companies like BP and Exxon to renegotiate on Libya's terms. Using oil revenues to fund free healthcare, education, housing projects, and infrastructure. For the first time, Libyans began to feel their country's vast oil wealth. In 1975, Gaddafi published his political manifesto, the Green Book, a three-part guide where he rejected both capitalism and communism. Instead, he offered his third international theory. Advocated direct democracy through people's committees and popular congresses. Claimed political parties were tools of oppression. Sought to blend Islam, socialism, and tribal traditions. During the 1970s, literacy soared from below 20% to over 80%. Life expectancy nearly doubled. Education, electricity, and healthcare became free. Massive irrigation projects like the Great Man-Made River, begun in 1984, aimed to turn desert into farmland, one of the largest engineering projects in history. But Gaddafi's Libya was also marked by repression. Political opponents were jailed, exiled, or assassinated abroad. Freedom of expression was virtually non-existent. A cult of personality began to grow around Gaddafi. Still, for many Africans and Arabs, Gaddafi appeared to be an anti-imperialist hero. By the late 1970s and 1980s, Gaddafi's eccentric personality made him a global spectacle. Known for his flamboyant robes and all-female bodyguard unit, the Amazonian Guard, delivered marathon, fiery speeches filled with revolutionary zeal. Internationally, he positioned himself as the patron of global revolution, supported the Irish Republican Army, IRA, in Northern Ireland, funded the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, backed African liberation struggles from Nelson Mandela's ANC in South Africa to anti-colonial movements in Chad and elsewhere. But this came at a price: accusations of terrorism. 1986 Berlin discotheque bombing. U.S. accused Libya of responsibility after 3 were killed, including 2 American soldiers. Pan Am Flight 103 bombing over Lockerbie, Scotland, 1988, 270 people killed. Western intelligence blamed Libyan agents, leading to decades of sanctions. U.S. President Ronald Reagan labeled Gaddafi the mad dog of the Middle East. In April 1986, the U.S. launched Operation El Dorado Canyon, airstrikes on Tripoli and Benghazi. Gaddafi survived, but dozens were killed, including his adopted daughter Hannah Gaddafi. This cemented his hatred of the West and his image as its sworn enemy. Throughout the 1990s, Libya faced UN sanctions and diplomatic isolation. The economy suffered, but Gaddafi held on to power through oil revenues and tight internal control. By the late 1990s, Gaddafi shifted focus from Pan-Arabism, which had failed after conflicts with Egypt, Syria, and others, to Pan-Africanism. He became a leading voice in the creation of the African Union, AU, in 2002. Advocated for a United States of Africa with one military, one passport, and one currency. Proposed a gold-backed African dinar, a single currency to free Africa from reliance on the US dollar and IMF. This alarmed Western powers, especially France and the US, who feared losing financial dominance over Africa. In 2009, he was crowned King of Kings of Africa by traditional rulers from across the continent. Gaddafi invested billions into African projects, satellites, infrastructure, and aid to poor countries. Yet, inside Libya, dissent was rising. Many Libyans saw him as increasingly out of touch, clinging to power for decades without reform. The spark came in Tunisia, December 2010, where protests toppled longtime ruler Ben Ali. The wave of uprising spread across the Arab world, Egypt, Yemen, Syria, and Libya. In February 2011, protests broke out in Benghazi against Gaddafi's rule. His response was brutal. Security forces opened fire on demonstrators. Gaddafi vowed to crush opposition, calling protesters rats and cockroaches. This escalated into a full-scale civil war. By March 2011, the United Nations authorized military intervention. NATO, led by France, Britain, and the US, launched airstrikes on Gaddafi's forces. Despite his defiance, by August 2011, rebels captured Tripoli. Gaddafi fled to his hometown of Sirte. On October 20, 2011, NATO aircraft bombed a convoy near Sirte. Gaddafi survived but was captured by rebel fighters. Amateur footage showed him blooded, beaten, and pleading for his life. Moments later, he was shot dead. The man who once ruled Libya for 42 years, feared by the West and revered by many Africans, was gone. In death, Gaddafi left behind a divided legacy. The dictator. He ruled without elections, suppressed dissent, and enriched his family and loyalists. Human rights abuses were widespread. He gave Libya the highest standard of living in Africa, with free housing, education, and healthcare. He challenged Western domination and dreamed of a united Africa. But Libya today remains fractured, torn apart by militias, warlords, and foreign interventions. Many Libyans now ask, was life better under Gaddafi? History rarely gives us leaders who are purely good or purely evil. Muammar Gaddafi was both a tyrant and a dreamer. He rose from the desert to challenge the most powerful nations on earth, only to fall in the chaos of revolution. His story is not just the story of Libya. It is the story of Africa's struggle for independence, dignity, and unity. And even in death, Gaddafi's shadow still looms over the future of Africa and the Middle East.